Hi, Pine Forest. It's Julia. I'm going to be reading Polar Bears Past Bedtime, chapters 5 and 6 today. Chapter 5 is called You're It. The dogs were barking wildly at two small creatures playing in the moonlight. Polar bear babies, cried Annie. One roly-poly cub leaped onto the other, and then they rolled through the snow. Hi, little bears, Annie called. The cubs jumped up and shook themselves like wet puppies. Then they scampered toward Annie, who rushed to greet them. Hi, 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 she called. Wait, shouted Jack. Where's their mother? He looked around for their mother bear, but she was nowhere in sight. Maybe they're orphans, he thought. Jack looked back at Annie, and she was wrestling with the little bears in the snow. She was laughing so hard that she couldn't stand. Jack started laughing too. He carefully put the bear masks into his pack, and then he ran to join Annie. She was running with the cubs across the snowy tundra. One of them raced to her, tagged her, and then raced away. Annie ran after the bear and tagged him back. You're it, she said. Jack and the other cub joined in. Soon, Jack and Annie and the two cubs were all chasing each other over the moonlit snow. They ran until the two cubs fell down ahead of them. The cubs lay perfectly still. Panting, Jack and Annie stared at them. Are they hurt? Annie wondered out loud. Jack and Annie ran to the cubs. Then, just as they leaned down to see if they were all right, the cubs jumped up. They pushed Jack and Annie over and scampered away. They're pretending, said Jack. He laughed. Jack and Annie charged after the cubs. They ran over the white tundra until they came to a frozen sea. Jack looked around. We're pretty far from the igloo. I don't hear the huskies anymore, he said. Maybe we should go back. In a minute, said Annie. Look. The bear cubs had scooted up the snowbank. They are on their backs, sliding down the bank onto the ice-covered sea. Jack and Annie laughed. It's like sledding, said Annie. Let's try it. Okay, said Jack, but then we have to go back. Jack followed Annie up the snowbank, and he clutched onto his pack with his arms. Annie lay down on her back, and she whooped as she slid down the ice. Jack followed her. Watch out below, he shouted. The little bears were sitting at the bottom of the snowbank. One quickly whapped Jack in the face with her furry paw, and then she lay down. I'm tired too, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. Let's just rest for a minute. Jack and Annie looked up at the orange moon as they lay beside the cubs, and all they could hear was the wind and the soft breathing of cubs. That was fun, said Annie. It was, said Jack. But we better head back to the igloo. The seal hunters probably are looking for us. Plus, we have to solve the riddle. Jack rolled onto his side and tried to stand. Crack! Uh-oh, he said. He went back down to his knees. I think we're on the ice. What do you mean, said Annie. She started to stand. Another crack ran out. Uh-oh, she said. She carefully laid back down. The polar bear cubs moved closer to Jack and Annie, and they made little crying sounds. Jack wanted to cry too, but he took a deep breath. Let's see what our book says, he said. He reached in for his pack of the Arctic book, and he took the masks out and handed them to Annie. I took these from the igloo by mistake, he said. As he started to reach for his Arctic book, he heard the loudest crack of all. Crack! We're not even moving, and the ice is cracking, said Annie. Just then, there was a new sound, a low snorting sound, that came from the top of the snowbank about 50 feet away. Jack looked up. Staring down at them was a giant polar bear. The polar bear mother, whispered Annie. Chapter 6 is called Flying Bears. The cubs whimpered louder. They want her to go to her, but they're afraid of the ice, whispered Jack. Annie petted the cubs. Don't be afraid, she told them. You'll go back to your mother. The big polar bear growled. She paced back and forth, sniffing in the air. Annie kept patting the two cubs and whispering to them. Jack looked in the book for anything that might help. Finally, he found something. Even though a female polar bear can weigh as much as 750 pounds, she can walk on ice too thin. She can walk on ice too thin to hold a person by balancing her weight and sliding her paws over the ice. Oh man, that's incredible, whispered Jack. He watched the mother polar bear walk down the snowbank. On the giant, silent feet, she crept about at the edge of the frozen sea. She tried to step onto the ice, but each time she did, it cracked, and she had to retreat. At last, she found a firm spot. Then the polar bear stretched out her four legs and lay on the ice. Slowly, she moved towards herself, pushing with her claws. She's coming for her baby, said Jack, or is she coming to get us? I don't know, said Annie. Hey, let's put on those masks. What for? Said Jack. Maybe they'll protect us, said Annie. Maybe she'll think we're polar bears, too. Oh, brother, said Jack. But Annie gave him a bear mask. He took off his glasses and slipped it on. Jack peered through the mask holes. It was hard to see a huge white bear sliding over the frozen sea. He squinted. That helped. The polar bear looked at her cubs and let out a deep moan. The little two bears carefully went to get their mother. She licked the cubs and touched her nose against each of theirs, and then they crawled back down on her back. They were safe now, said Jack. Even if the mother breaks through the ice, they can swim. She can swim them to shore. Yeah, I just wish she wouldn't leave us behind. The mother bear slowly turned her body around and then pushed off with her hind legs, and her cubs on her back. She began sliding away. Let's try moving like her, Annie said. But we could break through the ice and freeze to death, said Jack. If we stay here, we'll freeze too. Remember, Seal Hunter said his people had learned from the polar bears. Jack took a deep breath. Okay, he said, let's try it. He lay on his stomach and he spread out his arms. Then he copied the bear, pressing his mittens against the ice and pushed off, sliding his feet. Amazingly, there was no cracking sound. Grrr, he growled. And then he pushed off again. Jack heard Annie sliding behind him. He kept going and he pushed and slid. He pushed again and slid again. He made the movements over and over until something happened. He didn't feel like a boy anymore. He felt like a polar bear. Then Jack felt something even stranger. He felt like a flying polar bear. Jack swirled along his arms and legs like they were giant wings, and the moonlit sea ice was a glassy sky. He remembered what the seal hunter had said. Polar bears can fly. The next chapter is called Spirit Lights. Thanks for reading with me.